Hi everyone, it's Yvette Le Blowitz from SPAITGIRL.com and welcome to the SPAITGIRL Talk Show podcast. I'm super excited to be here with you today and our very special guest, Jaime Rose Chambers, who is an accredited practicing dietitian and nutritionist. She is actually based in Sydney, Australia, and she's a commentator regularly for the Australian Women's Weekly, Body and Soul Online, various magazines. She appears on our regular TV shows like Today, Tonight, A Current Affair, and she's an author. I'm going to be sharing her second book that is just officially launched today, which is the 16-8 Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle Plan. But Jaime, welcome to the Spirit Girl podcast show. Super grateful to have you here and with our global audience today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Jaime, we're just going to get straight into the podcast show. Are you happy to tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Of course. So I'm a clinical dietitian and nutritionist, and I didn't know that existed when I was sort of searching to, find out what I wanted to do for my career. What I did know is that I loved food and everything about it. And I grew up in a household with a mother as a doctor, and I really liked that. The medical and scientific side of things as well. However, I didn't really know how to put the two together, and had a grand epiphany one day where I discovered the degree or the career of being a dietitian, and basically applied on the spot, and that started my journey, at uni for 5 years studying dietetics. From there, I went straight into clinical dietetics. So through uni, I worked at the clinics that I work in now on reception and helping to set up one of the clinics. And so as soon as I was able to set up my clinic, I just started, and here I am 13 years later. And I work within medical clinics. So I see basically everything. So from patients with cancer, type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes, all sorts of gut issues, food intolerances, pre and post-operation, heart disease, you name it, I see it. We've got an integrative clinic, so we see very complex cases as well. So I think my interest in intermittent fasting has come through, sort of using many different tools and strategies with my patients over the years. And when I discovered intermittent fasting, I was incredibly excited because the research was so fantastic. And so I now use it as a tool in clinic for many of my patients. So I look forward to telling you all about it today.
Yeah, Jaime, that's an incredible journey, and congratulations on everything you have achieved and done. And I'm sure there'll be a podcast listener out there who you've just inspired to study and carry on that field, listening to your story. Can I ask you, with your book, there's so much hype and buzz around intermittent fasting, but what is this intermittent fasting, this 16-8 intermittent fasting? What is it? How can we do it? And what are the benefits?
Sure. So I think we probably all were introduced to intermittent fasting with the 5-2 style or method of fasting. 16-8 came after that, and I think it probably, I would say it's a much more popular because it's got just as good research behind it, but it's much more sustainable. So what it is I call it an eating pattern. So it's a pattern of eating normally and then fasting for a period of time. And it's a daily pattern. So if you think we've got 24 hours in a day, you would fast for 16 of those hours, and you would eat within an 8-hour window of the day. So for most people, they would eat over, sort of maybe a 12 to 14-hour window of the day, and they might fast for that same period of time, 12 odd hours overnight. It's really then just about extending that overnight fast so that you're fasting for more like 16 hours. The benefit of that is that your body spends a small amount of time every day in a fasted state. And we know from research that being in that fasted state does some pretty cool things with our body, particularly our cells. where the cells are kind of forced to function differently. So they, I think in the Western world, we tend to eat constantly. And that was an old sort of diet method, was to eat every 3 to 4 hours or every 2 to 3 hours, which really does suit some people, but is also not necessary for some people as well. And I think just giving our system and our cells and our metabolism and our gut and everything a rest for a little bit of time every day has been shown to do some pretty kind of cool and magical things in our body. So in terms of what the research is showing, I think probably the greatest interest comes from weight. So let's start with that. So I think where intermittent fasting can be, particularly the 16-8 type of intermittent fasting or method of intermittent fasting, what the research has shown is that when put head to head with a calorie controlled diet, being, sort of a 12 or 1500 calorie a day diet, which I guess is the traditional sort of weight loss method, both groups of people who did either intermittent fasting or did a calorie controlled diet had similar outcomes. The difference, however, is that it is longevity. So what we know is that, being kind of hungry all the time, every day, all day, when you're eating a low calorie diet, a lot of people can't sustain that for very long, and they go back to old habits, or they start craving other foods, and boom, the diet's over, and any weight that you might have lost, you've regained again. And generally the pattern is, they've gained that weight back and more, which leaves you in a worse position than when you started. However, with intermittent fasting, because when you are eating, you're eating your normal diet in your 8-hour eating window, and there's some flexibility around what you can eat. There's no rules and restrictions around what you can eat. You're not pulling out food groups. You're eating until you're full and satisfied. There's really, I think, psychologically and physiologically, it just makes it so much more sustainable to carry that out over a long period of time. So we don't have any long-term research yet, because this method of fasting is quite new. So all the research is all fairly new. But what we think will happen, and certainly what I've observed in clinic as well, is that anyone that's been following it for a period of time, they're able to sustain it for a long period of time. And I think that's a really important factor. I think it is the most important factor when we're doing any, sort of diet or lifestyle manipulations or following a certain eating pattern, is that it needs to be sustainable. And so that's where I think that the fasting can be, sort of such a valuable tool for not only weight management, but for our health as well. Then if we look at chronic disease, so heart disease, cancer, diabetes, we all have risk. There are risk factors for these chronic diseases. So for example, for type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, high blood sugar levels, they are risk factors for type 2 diabetes. And what research has shown is that the 16-8 intermittent fasting can help to reduce the risk factors of pretty much all of these chronic diseases. And so I think that's absolutely, I think that's amazing. The science nerd in me really gets quite excited by that. If we look at brain health, so there's sort of two sides to brain health. There's neurodegenerative diseases, so Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, which really is what, kind of started my interest in intermittent fasting too, is because my grandfather had early onset Alzheimer's, and my dad started to do intermittent fasting in order to try and reduce his risk of getting early onset Alzheimer's. So there's some pretty fascinating research on how intermittent fasting can almost kind of help rewire the brain and prevent plaques forming in the brain that are sort of what starts the disease progression with some of these neurodegenerative diseases. So again, I think that's fascinating. Then in terms of just general cognition, memory, brain function, a lot of anecdotal evidence to show that intermittent fasting can really help people feel sharper, improve their memory, improve their cognition. Really sort of fascinating stuff there too. And then just some not comprehensive and kind of good studies, but there is some decent research coming through about intermittent fasting and inflammation, so potentially helping to reduce inflammation. A lot of those studies done through Ramadan, so where participants would be fasting through the day and then they eat, once the sun's gone down. So obviously slightly different to 16/8 intermittent fasting, but the same kind of philosophy in that they're spending a vast, majority of the day in a fasted state. So a lot of those inflammatory cells coming down, which were found in some of those studies. In terms of gut health, there's some good research showing that, being in a fasted state can help to increase some of the strains of bacteria in our gut, some of the healthy strains of bacteria in our gut. And, again, anecdotally, what I see with a lot of my patients is they will sit down in front of me after they've been fasting for a while and they'll just say, I just feel lighter, I feel less bloated, my bowels are functioning better. I'm more in touch with my hunger cues because often people are just eating when they feel they should be eating as opposed to when they want to be eating or when they're genuinely hungry. So I think even just getting back in touch with hunger cues is a really, really, really important one. And then also eating food that they feel satisfied by often helps, even just in terms of having a roll-on effect of sort of preventing little binging episodes later on in the day too, where someone might kind of try and have that tuna salad for lunch and then mid-afternoon they're eating half a block of chocolate because they weren't satisfied from the meal that they ate earlier on. So even just little things like that, I think the fasting seems to have such a positive impact in so many ways. So yeah, that's my long-winded answer to that question.
Oh, wow, Jaime, that's incredible. I was getting super excited when I heard about the neuroscience of it, with inflammation reduction and the plaques, obviously that are part of that degenerative Alzheimer's and even those cognitive abilities to have less brain fog and to feel clearer and sharper. But the amount of women and people I speak to, but particularly women, and I know I experience myself now that I'm 43 plus, with that terrible bloating and having to get the gut health up and the microbiome. It just all sounds really incredible. So obviously I have a copy of your book, but for someone who's thinking, what time should they finish eating? This is a question I get all the time from our audience who reach out. Should they be having dinner at 6 o'clock, 7 p.m., 8 p.m., cut off? And then when should they start kind of like their eating pattern? And if so, whilst they're doing that fasting, is it water, juice, coffee? What would that look like for them?
Okay, so in terms of timing, what the research is showing is that the best time for people to be eating is in the bulk of the daylight hours. So breaking your fast around 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and that means finishing eating and starting the fast again around 6 to 7 o'clock at night. So obviously that's going to vary slightly depending on people's routines and sort of what their lifestyle looks like. Some people are like, well, look, I don't get home from work till 7 o'clock at night, which means I'm not eating dinner till 7:30, 8 o'clock. That's fine. It's a shuffling of a couple of hours on either side of that is okay. It's really got to suit you. I think there's a couple of things to consider. One is what we should be doing is avoiding eating when it's dark, basically. So a lot of this new research on this type of intermittent fasting is all based around our circadian rhythm. So our sleep and wake cycle. Our body functions differently when it's daylight because our cells are awake and they're expecting to be needed to be fueled and to be carrying about our daily activities because it's the daytime. Our cells and our hormones change then when the sun goes down. We're getting ready for sleep and the body's going, I don't need food now. I'm about to go to sleep. We don't need to be eating. So I think the most important things is, trying to finish eating in the evening as early as you possibly can manage. try to finish eating at least 2 to 3 hours before your bedtime. And so then you can kind of try and gauge then if you're finishing eating at sort of, let's say 7 o'clock at night, and that's something that you're able to sustain, then you want, if you sort of count back 8 hours, then you're going to be breaking your fast at around 11 o'clock in the morning. But in saying that, really, it's about sort of breaking your fast when you genuinely feel hungry and ready to eat. So that might be anywhere between, you know, sort of 8 and midday, whatever suits you. It's just got to work for you. And it might, a lot of people are really ruled by the clock, and I would encourage you not to be. I think it's really important, if it ends up being that you your eating window is 8.5, 9 hours in the day and not exactly 8 hours, it doesn't matter. It's just about, you know, I think the most important thing is, you know, eating later in the morning when you're genuinely hungry, and eating dinner as early as you possibly can in the evening, and then no eating afterwards. So I think if you can take away those two main points, I think that's the most important thing to consider. And again, doing the bulk of your eating and fueling within daylight hours. In terms of what you eat in that 8 hour window, so there's probably two main strategies that I think work really well for my patients. One is when you break your fast, some people want to have their milky coffee, you know, sort of at 10 o'clock in the morning. Go for it. Have that milky coffee. You may not feel like eating like a proper meal then. So some people might have a bit more of a snack at that time. So they would break their fast at, say, 10 o'clock with a milky coffee and a piece of fruit or something along those lines. And then they might wait till maybe 1 o'clock to have their lunch meal. Absolutely fine. However, you know, someone at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning might be really hungry, ready for a more substantial meal. And so they might break their fast with a breakfast style meal like a porridge, or they might have more like a brunch style meal like eggs on toast, or even a lunch meal like leftovers or a salad or something like that. Again, there are no rules to this. It's really what you feel like. And, you know, I think as long as it's a balanced and nourishing, you know, meal and, you know, sort of food that you can have over the course of that 8 hour eating window, with a variety of different foods within the 5 food groups, really that's the main thing that you want to be focusing on. So what that actually is when you are eating doesn't really matter, as long as it's sort of good quality food and you're meeting all your nutritional requirements. So so I think they're probably the main things. And then obviously, you know, within that 8 hour eating window, I think it's important then to be refueling every sort of 2 to 4 hours or so. So again, you might sort of go, you know, snack, meal, or it might be meal, snack, meal, or however that works for you. It's all in the book there, a range of different strategies that you can choose depending on what suits you. So then what to have when you're fasting. So there are 2 different strategies when it comes to fasting. One of them is that there's some interesting terms out there that I think are quite, you know, sound quite cool, but they call it clean and dirty fasting. So clean fasting being all you have is water when you're fasting. So that's considered a clean fast. So that might be done for people who really want to get those sort of anti-aging benefits as well. So the real cleaning up of cell byproducts, a process called autophagy that you might be hearing about, that's sort of centered around intermittent fasting, where basically the body kind of cleans up, you know, sort of broken cell byproducts, and you know, they consider that as sort of anti-aging process that happens. That can still happen, but maybe they believe not as intensely as if you do what we call a dirty fast, which probably has more the metabolic benefits. But it means that you can have black tea, black coffee. The rule, however, is that you want to have nothing more than about 40 calories. So if you did want to add a little splash of milk, you could to your tea or coffee. Obviously, black's going to be better, but if you really need to have that milk in there. And I think that's an important point. I heard a researcher say once that it's better to fast and have that little bit of little bit of milk in your tea or coffee than not fast at all. So if that's a make or break for you, or if that's a barrier, by all means have that little bit of milk in your tea or coffee, because it's better to do that and then and fast than not fast at all. So I think that's a really important one. A lot of people find that just by having that tea or coffee with a splash of milk is enough to get them through that fasting period, and they're good to go.
I love that you've clarified that, Jaime, because so many people think when they're fasting they can get the coffee in the morning, the creamy coffee at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. I've heard so many people say, I'm intermittent fasting and I'm doing it till lunchtime and I've got to get a coffee while I'm intermittent fasting. And I was so curious going, I wonder if it's herbal tea or black tea. So I'm so glad you've clarified that for the audience. And I have to say that your book has all of these incredible recipes in here. They're so amazing. Thank you. Obviously, if someone is finding that they are craving Cadbury chocolate, which is super addictive, when they walk past and it says $3, and they remember as a little kid that they had to share, this family-sized chocolate bar with so many others in their family. Obviously, your recipes in here, and you've touched on just eating wholesome food. When we're eating plant-based food and really nourishing food, obviously not processed, that's going to help, isn't it, with our blood sugar levels? So many people that work in an office feel that at 3:30 they crash and they need a coffee or maybe a chocolate. But if we get back to the basics of eating healthy food, which you go into all details in here, that's going to help stabilize that crash.
Yes. So obviously why we eat the way that we eat and why we go for foods like Cadbury chocolate is complex and very personal. If I'm to touch on the main reasons why that might happen and how to get around it, first of all, again, what some research has shown is that the intermittent fasting, a lot of people find that their cravings for high fat and high sugar food, junk food if you want to call it, really dampens down. And that could potentially be because blood sugar levels are, it helps with insulin sensitivity and, it sort of helps to regulate blood sugar levels a little bit better. So that could be one of the reasons why. A lot of people also find that generally and overall, in fact, there was one study that was done that found that the only reason people lost weight doing the 16-8 intermittent fasting was because their appetite decreased. So they just wanted to and needed to eat less over the day. They were able to eat what they wanted, but they chose to eat less because they didn't need to eat as much. So a lot of people find that, just by doing the intermittent fasting, they desire those sorts of foods less anyway. And so it does make it a little bit easier to manage. So that's quite cool. I think it's really important, however, to also just be mindful of our environment, because a lot of the way that we eat, despite whether you're doing intermittent fasting or not, is based on our environment. So if the combination of if you're feeling a bit tired and having a bit of a crash mid-afternoon, and then the work colleagues bring out, the bowl of chockies, or they're sitting right nearby, or, it is an extra challenge to say no when it's right there, in front of you and everyone else is doing it. So we've got to also just consider those environmental factors too. Intermittent fasting is not going to be a magical sort of, way of getting around that. But I think if you're mindful about putting into place some environmental barriers to getting to that chocolate, as well as doing the intermittent fasting, you might be on the right track to kind of being successful there. But also know as well that, there's food for nourishing and food for the soul. And I think having a little bit of whatever you feel like at that time, it won't make a difference in the overall scheme of things. So if you really feel like that little bit of Cadbury chocolate, have it. Maybe buy a little one like a Freddo Frog or something, eat it, be satisfied from it, move on from it. I think as soon as we start putting rules and restrictions around food, as humans, we start to become more obsessed with that food and we want to eat more of it, and it's harder to control. So again, another reason why I love the intermittent fasting, because I'm not saying cut out, carbs, cut out, junk food. There is a place for all of that. but you might just find it easier to manage if you are doing intermittent fasting.
I love that, because it's the managing part. And I really love your plan, because I feel once you're filling yourself up with all of this healthy food, you feel really hungry and satisfied. And I know, like, when I'm eating really well, I don't tend to want to go for the junk food, but if I'm not eating well, it just sort of, I don't know, it gets in your system, and then you seem to crave more and more. But once you start filling yourself up, it just makes such a difference. Jaime, I could talk to you forever about your intermittent fasting, but people are going to be curious about your self-care rituals. Like, how do you look after yourself, apart from, like, you're writing books, you're on TV, you've got your practice? What are some of your self-care rituals?
So, look, I've got two little kids who are 1 and 3, little boys, and so life is incredibly busy. So, you know, I've found that what would normally come naturally to me in terms of my self-care rituals are different these days, and I've really had to work hard to find ways around that to make it work for me. So I think in terms of exercise, you know, and this is not going to be appropriate for everyone, but I think for me, we've kept just one car. So one of us, my husband or I, has to walk to and from work, which is great, because again, it gets in that sort of incidental exercise. So it may not be every day, but it's certainly at least a few times a week where there's the walk to and from work. So that works for us. The other thing is, I just found trying to get myself to a gym or somewhere to get some exercise done was just such a challenge, getting ready and, you know, having little kids, you know, sort of needing to be fed and breakfasted and changed and all of that kind of stuff. So I get 20 or 30-minute little, you know, online exercise programs. I sneak up to the upstairs room when the kids are having breakfast or something, and I just quickly shove on my exercise gear, press play, and I've got 2 5-kilo hand weights up in our loft, and I just do what I can. So sometimes they follow me after 15 minutes and they're crawling all over me, and I'm like, that's fine, it's 15 minutes. Sometimes I can get 30 or 40 minutes in, but at least it's something. And so that sort of covers the exercise for now in this particular stage in my life. I feel genuinely fantastic when I do intermittent fasting. So for me, I wake up and I have a coffee with a bit of milk. I break my fast with a milky coffee mid-morning. And then I tend to feel quite hungry for my first meal of the day around 12 o'clock. So if I'm with the kids, I'll eat lunch, my first meal of the day, when they have their lunch. And then I'll often have 1 or 2 snacks through the afternoon, but which might be nuts or some sort of a homemade yummy something that I've you know, made for the kids as well. And then I'll have an early dinner with the kids at around sort of 5:30, 6 o'clock, cup of tea with my husband before bed kind of thing. So that I found works really, really well for me, and it ties in with the rest of the family. I find cooking and eating from home as much as possible really is an underrated health strategy, because you can control what you put into what you eat. You can control your portions. It's also, you know, obviously financially beneficial as well. So that's another really important one. And look, you know, in terms of meditation, I prescribe it all the time for my patients. I find it very difficult with 2 little busy boys to find that time. So for me, I do other things that are meditative. So I cook, and I get engrossed in books that I'm reading. So it might not be a formal meditation, but I find it meditative. It has that impact on me where I switch everything else off that's going on in my brain. So look, that's sort of where I'm at in my life right now. And I think that, you know, it's different for everyone, but that works for me right now. And I have to fight for me time. So I really, you know, make sure that I set aside some time for myself where I, you know, it doesn't need to be anything fancy, but I just have, you know, a few hours here and there for myself where I can just, reset, recharge. So yeah, that's me at this point in my life.
Yeah, well, Jaime, that is incredible. Like, I love your honesty, and that's going to be so beneficial for other women who are probably like high-fiving. Yes, Jamie's real. We feel, yeah, because so many mums or parents or carers, fitting that me time in is a challenge. But I love your strategy, and I love how you obviously are practicing what you preach when it comes to the intermittent fasting 16-8. I can't wait now to actually dive further into your book, create the recipes, to give this a go. And I'm looking forward to telling you, if not in a couple of months, how incredible I feel. And now I can't wait for everyone in the SPAITGIRL book club and community globally and our global audience to grab a copy of Jaime Rose Chambers, the 16-8 Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle Plan, which is out and it's been published by Pan Macmillan Australia. So Jaime, thank you again for being part of the SPAITGIRL podcast show. I love your passion, your expertise, everything you're doing to help us to feel good from within. You are such an incredible Aussie. Super proud of you. How can we stay in touch with you after this show?
Oh, well, thank you very much, firstly, for that. That is, makes me want to do more of what I do. So thank you very much for that. And thank you so much for having me. For anyone that wants to get in touch, I, love a bit of Instagram. So I'm at Jaime Rose _nutrition. My name's spelled JAIME ROSE _nutrition. My website is jaimerosenutrition.com.au. So feel free to, comment on my photos or DM me, whatever you like. And you'll find my email as well on my website.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jaime. And for all of our podcast listeners, when you grab a copy of Jaime Rose Chambers' brand new book, let me know how you feel. Has the 16-8 Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle Plan by Jaime helped you to feel good from within? I want to know. Take a screenshot, #SPAITGIRL. I will see you on the next SPAITGIRL podcast show, but be sure to subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and to tell a friend that you love to about this show. And together, let's feel good from within. Bye for now.